So when did you get married?
I got married at 28 to a man who's a child of Holocaust survivors.
Did you know that when you met him?
The one, did I know?
I mean, how did you meet?
How
did you meet, and how did that come out?
Okay, not when I met him. The one thing that was said to me about marriage was that I should marry a Jewish man. You know, that seemed very important to my parents. That was not seemed, but it was not a question. The way we met, I was in graduate school. One of the women who was a painter in the program had a party. Her husband was a philosophy major. My husband was a friend of his, so we met at this party. And I don't remember how it came out that, you know, the way it came out was that he was born in Romania and came here at 13, so when I started to learn his history, I learned his parents' history.
Were his parents alive? Did you meet them?
His mother was, his father wasn't.
Yeah. How did your parents, first of all, we should say his name again.
Oh, Peter.
Okay. How long had you known Peter before you introduced him to your parents?
Oh, 8 months maybe.
At that time, did you present him as someone you might marry? Was that already in your mind, or just as my current boyfriend?
A friend. You know, I didn't introduce my parents to many of my boyfriends for a variety of reasons, but and that's where, you know, the guilt thing comes in. You know, they won't prove why bother, why give myself a hard time, or right. Whatever,
or give them a hard time.
Or give them a hard time, right? So I guess, yes, I guess maybe it was thought of as serious.
Did they approve of Peter?
They did. Without, well, they did, yeah.
And how long after you had been dating him did you get married?
Probably a year or so after.
Were your parents involved in the wedding planning?
Yeah. They were, as were his parents. What I learned, his mother being of Romanian background, my parents being Polish background, was that just because you were a Jew who survived the Holocaust didn't mean you were going to get along. That even the different areas in Europe thought of themselves in different ways. In terms of the class system, oh, you're from this country, my parents were Polish, she was Romanian, she was above Polish. My mother-in-law held that she was.
Did that create problems for your marriage?
No. I mean, basically they got along, it was fine. You know, it was very civil, it was not a problem, but it was just interesting for me personally.
Yeah, your parents must have felt it.
Yeah, I think maybe they felt it. Yeah. I guess so. I mean, they got along. Everyone got along well enough, but it was for me like suddenly an interesting.
Did your mother, who was the spokeswoman of the family, have anything to say about whether or not you were going to have children? Was that important to her?
Oh, she wanted me to have children.
I mean, she made that clear.
Right.
For just you or for all three of you?
You know, being married, having children, having a home meant you succeeded. And I think it's remarkable that my parents succeeded as well as they succeeded after what they went through. So I don't think they necessarily wanted children for themselves or to keep. I mean, maybe that's what they thought, but that wouldn't be something I was conscious of. I was more conscious of it as it shows that you've succeeded in life. That was
more so
simple
than you're keeping the Jewish people alive, you know.
Yeah, as I said, there was no question that they wanted me to marry a Jewish man. So it's not, it's not that I wasn't, I carried that guilt with me. But I always, well, I wanted children till I was in my 20s, and then I finally said, why do you want children? And asked that question. But, I think, you were supposed to have children. That was the thought.
So by the time you married, did you and Peter want to have children?
We were married 5 years before we had children, and then we decided we wanted to. Yeah, I wanted to have a child, yes, and Peter wanted to have a child.
And can you tell me about your children?
Yes, my older son Josh is in advertising. I'm very proud of both my children. They're now adults out of college in their 20s, living on their own, making their way in the world. So I think that as a parent, that's what I'm grateful for. My older son is very independent, intense young man, doing very well. Ambitious, which in some ways, is odd to our personality. So the way he goes about his ambition, not that he hurts people, but he's driven, that kind of personality. And my younger son is in economics and doing very well. Also calmer personality, I guess if you divide them, I'd say his personality is more like mine, and my older son is more like Peter's, but Peter would probably say the opposite. So.
What was their relationship like with their grandparents?
Okay, well, they're 5 years apart. Josh had a great relationship with my father. I mean, he will say that. He remembers my father. Ari was 4 when my father died. So he remembers him but doesn't quite remember him. And Peter's mother and my mother, they thought of as grandparents. Yeah, my mother, a grandmother who told them what to do.
Did they ask questions about where the 3 grandparents were from, or what happened to them?
When Josh, my older son, was 4 years old, he noticed my uncle, who had been in a concentration camp, had numbers on his arm. So my 4-year-old son asked me why his uncle had numbers on his arm. And because I was not told anything, I was going to tell him. And I told him. When I think back at it, I wonder what I told him, but he absorbed what he understood and didn't absorb. So he grew up very much knowing what he could absorb throughout his life.
Had you ever noticed the numbers?
On my uncle's hand, not consciously. Not consciously.
So he knew from a young age. What about your other son?
I think the same. Both my boys grew up with my painting images of the Holocaust. So both my boys would say, when are you going to stop painting those depressing things, or something. But they knew. And at that point, certainly my father, but my parents would talk about it because survivors talked about it. People were being taped, so you would have memory of it. So in a sense, it was a very different environment when they were growing up than, when I was growing up and you didn't talk about it.
Did they ever ask their grandparents any questions, or was it all funneled to you and Peter?
No, and it would be Josh because, he was 10 when my father died, so if any questions were asked, he would have. I mean, Ari was 5 and wouldn't have. Ari actually is named after one of my mother's brothers, so you asked that question. My nieces as well are named after brothers and sisters of my parents.
So all of you did that,
yes,
keeping that going as well.
Did that, keeping that going.
Right.
As well.
How did you observe Judaism in your own home, in your marital home, and with your children?
How did I do that? I was married by a rabbi. I was not particularly a religious person. Maybe spiritually a little, but not. So my children went to a Reformed temple till they were bar mitzvahed, and then they had a choice whether they wanted to continue or not. My parents were kosher. I didn't keep a kosher home. When they were over, I brought in kosher food and used paper plates, but I didn't keep a kosher home.
So they didn't eat your cooking?
No.
But
well, they might eat, like, if it were a dairy meal, but they certainly wouldn't.
For a meat meal that you brought it in?
Right. I brought in, right.
Did they ever say, did your mother, the spokeswoman, ever say anything about you're not being kosher?
Both my mother and my father.
What did they say?
Well, they were upset. They would have liked me to keep the traditional Jewish household.
What about Peter's mother? Did she?
She didn't keep
She
a
didn't.
kosher home.
So it didn't bother her
Didn't
at
bother her.
all?
She wasn't brought up, actually, in a religious home.
When you were growing up, and then when your children were growing up, did any of you experience any anti-Semitism?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I think Josh will speak more about being self-conscious about being Jewish. That I think that for him maybe to some degree was an issue. But yeah, I think we both, well, I did.
What happened with
Well,
you?
just the typical things I think kids are, especially high school kids, nasty. You get called a kike or whatever, that sort of thing. I can't think of anything, much more than that.
Did you ever tell your parents that that was happening?
No.
Not in America.
Right.
Now that you're older than you were then,
Yes.
do you feel you have an understanding of the suffering and the losses that your parents experienced?
Oh, definitely. As an adult, going through stages in my life, being married, having children, they're having grandparents, looking at the world, yes, I definitely do.
So that sort of developed as you had life experiences of your own.
Right. I think, when I was in my 20s, I more asked the question to myself of, how would I have reacted as a German citizen living in Germany, seeing all this happen but not seeing it? Like, would I have reacted differently? And, I grew up with, you shouldn't have any prejudices because look what it leads to. So those were, the questions in my 20s. And then you think about mankind differently as you get older.
Did you ever have any dreams or thoughts of what if I had been the Jew during the Holocaust? Or seeing yourself in a dream as being and having a Holocaust experience?
I don't know beyond, I painted them out, people would say, maybe. I don't think consciously beyond fear dreams that people have. I don't think any, you're a Jew, you're going to be put away, you're going to be gassed or killed.
Was there any feeling within your family that it could happen here, that Jews were in danger in the United States or possibly Israel?
My parents, my father died about almost 20 years ago. My mother died about 8 years ago, I think. So she saw more of history change than my father did. They became more conservative as they became older, that was interesting. My father is buried in Israel. He wanted to be buried in Israel. So I think that maybe had something to do with how he felt about America and America changing. My mother died the spring before the World Trade Center disasters, and I always thought I was glad she didn't live to see that. I think, I think that, as the fact that they got older and became more conservative may have to do with their feelings of insecurity.
Yeah. So your father definitely felt a connection to Israel.
Oh, definitely, right.
Did your mother?
No, if it were up to my father, he would have moved her. My father was, we've been talking about my mother. I'm very glad I had the two parents I had, because my mother was more the depressive, serious, fearful type. And my father was very social, and though maybe fearful, he wouldn't care to go beyond his fear and do things. So if it were up to my father, he would have spent the last years of his life in Israel. My mother wouldn't go because her kids were here. No, well, maybe dangerous, but her kids were here. And I'm thinking about this in the 70s and 80s when it was a different situation in Israel than it is now in terms of they're having won wars and
So is your mother buried here in the United States?
So my father is buried in Israel and my mother is buried here. When my father died, he made me and my brother promise that we would bury him in Israel, because he knew if he spoke to my mother about it, she'd give him a hard time. So he didn't talk to her about it. Clearly at the time he was buried, my mother had 2 graves put aside in Israel, thinking she would be buried there too. She lived, 12 years more than my father, so when she was dying, she realized that was ridiculous. She wanted us to have a place to mourn her, so she's buried here.
You had mentioned that she had a hard time traveling. Was she able to go to Israel when your father was buried there?
I didn't go and she didn't go because it was just physically too difficult for her to do. My brother went, my younger brother went to Israel.
As they aged, did you feel that any of their health problems were related to the starvation, or with your father, if he any kind of physical abuse that they suffered during that?
I would think yes. My mother had arthritis. I have all her physical problems. So and today I know they're genetic maybe, but at the time I thought a lot of that had to do with. I'm sure some of it had to do with the Holocaust. Both she and my Uncle Sam had a slight hunchback. He worked in the coal mines. As she was told, if she had been a young child here, that would have been corrected. So, that's
right. As they were aging and becoming more ill or more fragile, did they talk to you any more openly than they had in the past?
Well, my father did, and as I said, that would be the time when people were being interviewed and people were starting to talk about it. And he would answer whatever question I asked about it. And not always, sometimes I thought, but you told me this happened in this place or that place. And then I realized maybe he really didn't know exactly what camp he was in when he was in a camp, or so that could have been some of it.